Welcome back, everyone, to another episode. Today we're going to be talking about a little bit something different, but first I want to say sorry for not posting so much. It got to a really weird time where all the weather's just really funky, so I haven't been out fishing. I got really busy with classes and stuff like that because it was working its way into the final few weeks of the semester, so I hadn't been able to film because of being so busy with projects and homeworks and stuff like that. But anyways, I got my buck tag filled in Ohio. Unfortunately, it wasn't the way I wanted, and it wasn't on film. So, I'm going to go through with a little bit about the story of how I got my first buck ever in Ohio, and my first buck ever for that fact. But, yeah, I mean, it's just an interesting story. I've got some pictures from trail cams and that I took and everything to kind of go along with what all happened. And it was really interesting and kind of sad to see, but, you know, it's how it happens. So, anyways, let's hop into the story of this buck. So I got two properties I hunt on. One of them where I shot that doe at, and one that this buck came off of. I've hunted both properties all season. They're both in different counties. So, yeah, I started to not have as much success on that one place. So I swapped over during rut to my other place, which is where this buck came from. But to start off, came into November, the first part of rut. November 3rd, I went out there to hunt. I was sitting in my back stand along a field line, and all of a sudden I hear crunching behind me. Here comes a nice 8-point buck. Walked out of the woods, straight down the field, 15 yards in front of me. I shot. It was the first deer I've ever shot at. I hit high, hit right above its shoulder into no man's land on the buck, and I watched him run off, and he ran like 1,000 yards. Later that day, we tracked for 5-6 hours, four of us. We found some blood about 150 or 1,500 yards one direction, went the other direction 300 yards, found more blood, just little bits, but not very much at all. And so we concluded that he survived. So that was November 3rd. Come around, I hunted that property a few more times, didn't get that buck on camera at all. Had a few that were questionable to where I'm like, I don't know if this is, I can't say this is him, I can't say it's not him, and stuff like that. I hunted that property, didn't get anything else, went back to my other property, shot that doe in the video that you guys saw, and then I kind of just gave it a few days until really like gun season, and that was the next time I was getting ready to go out. So, come gun season, it was, I believe that was November 30th, 31st, whatever, however many days were in November. It was the Monday that the gun season started. I went out there, instead of hunting, I went to put corn out, and I went to check trail cams to see about where I wanted to hunt on that property. I ended up getting this picture. Actually, I'll go through all three pictures. So, here are those three pictures that came through on that day. As you guys are seeing, this buck came through on Sunday, which was the day before I was there, in the middle of daylight. It was like 11 a.m. He came through. He's a nice buck. The next two are, at least I think there's two more pictures. These are of another buck, not my biggest buck I've got on this property, but another nice buck that I've got there, and he came through at night. I've had both of these bucks all season on trail cam, and have been tracking them all season. Either of them I would gladly take. So on Monday while I'm checking these cameras, I'm thinking, like, since this came out by my tripod at 11 a.m. on Sunday, I'm like, on Wednesday, the next time I'm able to hunt, I'm going to sit there all day in that tripod. I'm like, I'm going after this buck that came out in daylight. I'm like, I've never got a buck before. This would be an awesome buck. So that was my plan. So it comes around to Tuesday. It ended up being a day I have to work. The lady I work for is the one that owns this farm where I got both these bucks on camera at. Her husband was home that day, and I was sitting at work, and about 8:30 a.m. rolls around, I get a call. And it was real random. He's never really called me like that because he's usually out hunting during gun week too. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, So I answer him like, hello? He's like, hey, Christian. He's like, how are you doing? Just let me know how I was doing. He's like, I'm heading back to the house right now. Their son owns land right next to their house that I'm also allowed to hunt. And he said that my son has a really nice buck that's right behind their house. He's been kind of antsy, and he was walking around, and then he'll just lay down. He was laying there, and he's been there for a while, and he's bleeding some. Like, we think it may be that bucky that you shot a few weeks back. And at this point, it's been a month since I shot at that buck. So I'm like, I don't know, it could be. But I was sitting there at work and it was driving me crazy. Finally, the landowner that I work with, she ended up saying, yeah, she's like, you can swing out there, go check it out real quick. So I drove out there, and this is what we found right behind her son's house when I got there. As you can see, because of the snow or ice all over the body, he had been there for a while. There were no tracks up to him because it snowed all that last night. So I'm sure he came in at the middle of the night sometime, and that after the snow kept on coming down, it covered up his tracks. So unfortunately, because of me thinking that could potentially be my buck, I have no idea. I'm like, since this could be my buck, it's only my responsibility to take him and tag him. So I went, and we didn't want to see him sit there and suffer anymore because we could tell that he was suffering, and I put him down. I had my shotgun with me because I was going to go later that night, potentially, and go hunting. So I put him down. The landowner, the landowner's husband, that was the one that called me, he's good friends with that county's game warden, so he called him out. He came out, checked it out. Unfortunately, he said since he wasn't there when he was put down, he can't write a receipt for it. I didn't care. I didn't care. I knew that was potential. I knew that was a potential of happening when I shot him. Before I shot him, I even told the landowner's husband or the landowner, I'm like, hey, I know that there's a potential that I've got to use my buck tag on this. I'm like, I don't care. Go ahead. I'm like, that's a risk I'm taking because I don't want to see this thing suffer and I don't want to see it go to waste potentially. So he came out and he said he can't write a receipt for it. He asked me to tag it. If I still had a buck tag, I said I do. So I tagged it. No, nothing wrong with it. I have no regrets on that whatsoever. Right thing to do. It was the moral and ethical thing to do. And it's definitely an awesome story that I'm going to have for the rest of my life on how I got my first buck. But anyways, I threw that in my truck after I tagged it, left it ungutted and everything. Here's a few pictures of me with the buck after we got it. And I was thinking about it all day. I'm like, I think this is my buck because I've got two bucks out there that look almost identical. I'm like, I think it is, but I'm like, I can't tell for sure. It had a broken tine. I shot an 8-point. This one's a 7-point with a broken tine. And I'm like, that tine hasn't been broken very long at all. So I went back to work to finish my shift. The one guy that works with me, he loves hunting, so he came out and checked out the buck. So checked it out, and we're like, we can't tell for sure if it was that buck or not. Go later that night to my buddy's house who helps me process my deer. And we were doing caping it and everything. He was getting the head off and everything so he could get it mounted for me. And we were looking, we're like, we felt something in the shoulder. It was weird. It wasn't the shoulder bone or anything, but it was about 4 or 5 inches long, which is how much arrow I had left in the buck that I shot. And it was hard, and it was like a pencil was stuck in his shoulder. Couldn't find out what it was after we cut it up and was looking. It was weird because there were 3 holes through the stomach of the buck. I took 2 shots at it to make sure it was dead when I put him down, but there was a 3rd hole I couldn't identify. So I'm like, that really makes me think that that's my buck because it could be that from that arrow, and that maybe the arrow slowly worked its way out or something. So we end up having that happen. My buddy goes through, we were looking at all the pictures, and it's very, very similar. There's one small difference that we can notice about the left side what would that be, the G2? The left side G2 being a little bit longer. But we weren't sure if it was just the pictures or if it actually was longer. So that's basically what ended up happening. That's how I got my buck. Now, it was ongoing about going back and forth about, is this my buck I shot? Is it not? I was really hoping it would be, so I didn't have to worry about potentially another buck being dead out there that I couldn't find, or he ended up dying because of coyotes or whatnot. And what we ended up finding about this buck, after my buddy, he does European mounts and he's getting the head and everything, it ended up being that this buck got gored through the back of his neck. He got gored through his eye, like right in front of his eye. And then he also got gored up through the roof of his mouth, down through his nasal cavity, nasal cavity, and then also through the bottom of his mouth, I believe he said. So he was a big-time fighter, and one of the bucks out there, which I've got a monster out there, he just wasn't having it, and decided to rough him up, and it ended up killing him. Because of this, I think he got affected, and then the coyotes got to him. I've got evidence that coyotes got to his butt. His butt had a big hole in it where coyotes were chewing at, and there was blood from it. And I found the spot where coyote prints ran up to, where buck prints were. There was a big dirt pile where dirt went everywhere, and there was some blood there. And then the tracks went straight back to where we found him. So that was the next day I ended up finding that. So that's the story of the buck. What ended up happening is actually when I'm filming this right now is a day or two after, no, 3 days after I checked my trail cam last, and this is the picture I found. This is the buck I shot. He's still alive. You can tell by if you look at his shoulder right above it, there's like a little almost like it looks like a broadhead where it went straight into the upper part of his shoulder. And I'll put a little arrow towards it so you guys can check it out. That's really what made me believe it. I went back to the picture that I got of him that morning when he crossed one of my trail cams on the way to come to where I was sitting, and you can verify it. So here's both those pictures, the one that I just got the other day and the one of the day I shot him, side by side so you guys can see for yourselves. As you can see, everything on the pictures matches up almost identical. This is good to me because I'm like, that buck's still alive. Like, he's good to go. He's still alive. He'll be okay. And that's what I'm real happy about. I don't have to worry about if he was dead or alive now. I've got evidence he's alive. The sad thing is that wasn't my buck that I put out with my shotgun. I was really hoping it would be, but great story that I'm going to have for my entire life. I'm always going to remember it, and it's just an experience that I still have no regrets for. I don't regret tagging that buck, even though it wasn't mine. I don't have any regrets on it. It was the right thing to do. And I think more hunters should be that way. I know people that would just have waited for the game warden to get there to give them a receipt because it's not the buck they wanted. Or they're after a massive buck or whatnot. And that's not the right thing to do. I mean, that guy was suffering there. He didn't deserve to sit there and suffer. He deserved to be put out of pain and not sit there and suffer anymore. So, yeah, like I said, I've got no regrets. But anyways, that is the entire story of my first ever buck I've harvested. Wasn't the conventional way that I wished it would have been, but it's how it happened, and it's a great story. So anyways, if you guys are still to this point and paying attention, thank you guys for watching all the way through, and we're going to be trying to keep uploading once a week throughout the entire winter. I've got some plans on more stuff. I'm going to be duck hunting and goose hunting that I plan on filming, so we got some stuff coming at you guys here soon. So anyways, thank you guys for watching, and we will see you guys in the next video.